The first one in is almost surely to die. But somebody's gotta do it. For them. For all of them. Entry Fragger is the most feared role in Counter-Strike, not because it generates the most value or that the most skilled players are in this role, but because nobody wants to go in first. At least until you are positively rolling your opponents, then suddenly everybody is donk. But if you want to bring a level of consistency and substantially raise the floor of all of your team's strats, being a good and versatile Entry Fragger is arguably the best skill set that you can bring to a team. So today, we'll be diving into the simple, yet infinitely deep world of entry fragging. This video is sponsored by SkinsMonkey. SkinsMonkey is a 24/7 online trading service for CS2 that is extremely easy to use and completely transparent. You just select your skins, the skins you want to trade for it, and they'll send you the offer. It's that simple. Right now, they are offering a 30% bonus on your first deposit and up to 35% if you use my code WAZOO at the top, along with an additional free $5 if you trade $100. That's a lot of free money, so check out SkinsMonkey today and use my code WAZOO. Thank you, SkinsMonkey. Before we get into the nuances of entry fragging, it is important to clear up the largest yet most pervasive misconception about the role, which is that your goal as an entry fragger is simply to go in first and get kills.
Oh my god.
While getting kills is certainly one of the most effective ways to be an entry fragger, the main goal you should be concerned with is gaining space. What is space, you might ask? Space is a broad term referring to the area that each team controls. The ultimate goal for the T's is to get control of the bomb sites to plant the bomb, and space is the loose term for all the important subdivisions of area before actually getting onto the site. For example, let's use A site Mirage. Before the rush, the T's will have control of Palace and A main, given that the CTs don't rush, and the CTs will have control over the entire site. When the rush is initiated, the T's will start to chip away at the CT's grip on the site, taking Tetris, shadows, site, and then maybe CT and jungle afterwards if they're lucky. The red area is the space being gained by the T's, and the job of the entry fragger is to lead the way to claiming this area so that the T's can get control of the site. This doesn't just have to be for bomb sites either. You can apply the same principle to important areas like mid, as a lurker going for a backstab, and even as a CT going for an aggressive angle. But for the case of entry fraggers, the ability to gain space is directly tied to assisting your team in controlling the site, which ultimately leads to having an easier post plan. It's also important for us to define what control means during a bomb site take, which in this case is the loosest definition. Control is simply just having a player posted up on an angle or having utility blocking the CT's entrance. So in this example, CT and jungle stairs is under control, even though there are players hiding behind the smokes for jungle stairs, and the player in CT can contest the plant. As an entry fragger, you are not going to be the player posted up. It's better to think of your job as gaining the space needed for the rest of your players to get into their positions, like as if you were depositing players into their respective places as you make your way across the site. But what's the best way to do this? There are two fundamental factors that you should consider before you entry: the type of bomb site you are pushing and the pace at which your team is playing. Stick with me, because half the battle with entry fragging is preparation. Generally speaking, you can divide all bomb sites in this game into two categories: rush sites and default sites. The primary element that differentiates the two is where the point of first contact is relative to the bomb site. Overpass is a good example of the difference between these two styles of sites, even though it is no longer in the active duty pool. I did talk about this in Aganor's video about Twist and Frozen, so if you already watched that, skip to this time frame, but I will be going into more depth than I did in Aganor's video. Anyways, since your first contact on B is most likely barrels, or against an aggressive CT peeking monster, if you get the kill on them, whether it be a pick or a trade, the bomb site is right next to that dead CT, meaning that your team can now storm the site with one less defender, and the CTs are most likely not going to be able to rotate in time. Compare this with a site, where the first point of contact is either going to be fountains or bathroom, so even if you get a kill, it's going to take so long to get to that bomb site that the CTs will most likely have the heaven player rotate to contest in time. Because the value of a frag is so different between these two sites, a general rule of thumb that I use is that if you know you are going to push a rush site, you should post up aggressively as an entry fragger as you wait for your team's util, so that if a CT does overextend, you can punish them and make the rush a lot easier. Compare this with a default site where, although a frag is a frag, you aren't really going to be able to take site easily even with a pick, so it's better to play with your team to up your chances of survival until you can close the gap with the site, like as if you were playing a default, and that significantly affects the pace in which your team is playing. Although I call these bomb sites rush sites and default sites, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to utilize those strats. What really changes when playing fast or slow is who is entry fragging. When you are putting the pedal to the metal and running as fast as you can towards a site, time is of the essence. The entry fragging responsibility will almost always go to the person with the best spawn, as they will have the greatest advantage when it comes to timing. If you are playing slowly, you can take your time to line up your teammates in their preferred spots, so it mostly comes down to choice of who is entry fragging in these setups. As you get into higher and higher elo, full rushing gets substantially harder, which is why you will almost never see pro teams go for a full buy rush. But for every other elo where CT defenses are not going to be as tight, it's important to realize that if you have a good spawn for a rush, you might just have to take one for the team, even if you don't want to. Let's talk about entry fragging. Yes, now we can actually talk about the video topic. Kind of. Because when the round starts, if you're not already bum rushing B with P90s like a true Counter-Strike player, you're going to have to wait a bit before you start pushing onto site. In this early phase of the round, you should be thinking about two things, which is where you will be posted up and what you are going to do with your utility. As I've said before, I would generally recommend that you post up aggressively for rush sites and play with your team on default sites. So the bigger question is, what are you going to do with your utility? Unfortunately, 90% of entry fraggers die before they make it to adulthood, so making sure you get at least some value out of your utility before you make it onto site and most likely die is a pretty good idea. Now admittedly, if you're solo queuing, you should probably just throw your own flashes and mollies to get onto the site, and save your smokes and HEs to help maneuver around the site safely. Although it's almost objectively better to let your teammates throw supportive utility for you, so that you can focus on angle clearing and taking duels, your randoms are probably not going to throw good util for you if we're being honest. So knowing some good entry flashes for yourself and safe mollies to reduce the amount of angles you have to clear is probably the best thing you can do for yourself as a solo entry. But if you have a group or decent teammates, consider dropping your utility that you don't expect to use to your teammates. Giving your teammates your nades after they threw theirs for you is just good manners in general. If you're slowly creeping up to a default site, it's actually not the worst idea to start the round as a support player, using your utility to aid your teammates in the early phases of the round, so that you won't have utility once you go for your entry onto site, and then die. Just no matter what, try not to waste utility by dying with it, but at the same time, don't just not buy utility. Please don't do that to yourself, you deserve more than that. Of course, the utility dynamic differs slightly if your team is running a default, where you will have T spread out across the map, so you won't always have enough people to do a proper smoke execute on certain sites, but luckily, by the nature of defaults, your teammate should have another entry of attack onto site, so all the smoke shouldn't be necessary. But what if you don't have your teammates there? It's not unlikely that your teammates die before they reach their positions, or that you rotate to the other site. You might only have 2 or 3 teammates to help with a rush, which is oftentimes not enough, especially since most of the utility on both sides will be used up at this point. In this case, your rush should mostly be about using numbers to win. given that your team actually got a few picks or trades, the CTs are going to be spread out across the site, or even across the map to try to defend everything. So just simply using a flash or double swing the CT on site will be your best option, because even if you get traded out, the other CTs won't be of much help, since they will be watching other angles and cannot get the trade easily, lending you to be able to isolate the fights a lot easier. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What should you do if everything does go right? Your teammates are all alive, you've taken sufficient map control to initiate a push. What next? If you are planning to throw your own setup util, do that first. But after that, everything is about pathing. Pathing is a concept that is not exclusive to entry fraggers, as it just refers to how efficiently you traverse the map to get into your positions. However, entry fraggers are probably the most concerned about their pathing, along with CT AWPers and lurkers. Because you want to take as much space as possible, it's good to know an efficient pathway where you can isolate all angles one by one, but also be able to do it quickly so that the CTs won't have time to rotate or get comfortable enough for a counterattack. This will mean that for certain angles, you will have to compromise your safety for speed. This might mean taking a risky 50-50 duel, running past a CT if they're not an immediate threat, and on certain sites, jump out of windows to your almost certain demise. Just whatever you do, do not ignore any angles. Even if you know with a 99% certainty that a CT won't be playing in some rat angle, when that 1% hits and your team gets wiped with a trigger discipline play, you're never going to hear the end of it. Now, most of you will die somewhere along your path, but fear not, because that's what an entry fragger is supposed to do. Don't fall into this mindset, but if anyone were to die on your team, the entry fragger is the one who is most expected to die. So it's not a huge loss if you manage to get your teammates onto the site, but make sure that you die in a tradable position. Don't be that guy who dies in the middle of nowhere, leaving your team down an extra frag. Because even if you are the first to die, if your team can get the trade, they will have a much better time against 1 or 2 extra CTs rather than 3 more likely than not holding a crossfire. If you manage to somehow survive all of this and make it to the endgame phase, you should make your way to the most aggressive post-up spot since you are ahead of the pack, and then play the post plant as you normally would. Some pro entry fraggers like to take even more space after the site is taken so that the CTs are further restricted on their rotates, but you can never go wrong with playing it safe at this point. There really isn't anything special to talk about here, because there are so many possibilities that could happen from the beginning of the round to bomb plant that it's better to use your own intuition and game sense at this point. Now that we went over all the phases of the game, the last thing you will need to understand the complete basics of entry fragger is when not to be an entry fragger. Because although there are roles in Counter-Strike, you are not hard locked into any of them. However, entry fragger is in a unique position, as you will most likely be the first one dead, so it's not like you can really shift out of your role. But if you're somehow alive after a failed rush, the first thing you need to do is look at your utility. Did you use any of it yet? If you dropped your utility or have it all saved still, then you can be quite flexible about what you want to do. You could play support for your teammates who already used their utility to help you. You could redistribute your nades so that your teammates can set you up again. It's your game at this point. If you've already used most of your utility, well, you can blame me for telling you to use it all, because you are probably going to be the entry fragger for the rest of the round, or a lurker, and just bait all of your teammates. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing in a dire situation, but having more options will always be better. But again, that's assuming you're not already kissing the floor by the time your team decides to change their mind. And that's all I have for you guys today. If you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys very soon.